Good morning everyone, today's video is dedicated to my PlayStation 4 players which are probably looking at the internet wondering what class should I play in NGS. Well, in today's video we're going to be going over every single class as well as their playstyles so that you can make an informed decision on what class you want to start out with, as it does impact the enjoyment of the game. But before we jump into all of that, if you're new to the channel, I upload NGS content daily, so if you do play this game I would really appreciate a subscribe as it really helps out the channel. Anyway, without further ado, let's begin the video. So for all my PlayStation 4 players, you guys are extremely lucky. The reason for this is because you are coming into the game as there are so many classes available. There are a total of 9 different classes available. However, something that I want to categorize before we jump into the different classes is the different damage types. So there are 3 different damage types. We have melee, ranged, as well as technique. So technique are basically spellcasters, range is basically range physical damage, and melee is melee physical damage. Those are the different damage types that we have, and it's very important for you to understand what type of damage your specific class deals, because it will affect how you augment your specific weapons. So augments are like power-ups which you can put into your weapons as well as armors in order to make it fit your specific playstyle. So as you can see here, I have plus 12% melee potency for this specific armor, which gives me 12% more damage to all of my melee type weapons. While if you look over here on my range as well as technique potency, it's only plus 2%. So depending on what weapons you decide to use and how your personal playstyle is, it will affect what augments you use in order to finalize your personal playstyle. But I'm going to talk about augmenting as well as weapons and armors in a separate video because it just gets too complicated. Today's video, we're just going to be focusing on the classes. So the first class available is very simple. It is the Hunter. The Hunter is your very traditional tanky, brawler, melee, in-your-face type of character. They have a lot of defensive stats, however they can deal a lot of damage. So something unique about NGS is every single class is a DPS, a tank, as well as a support. There is no holy trinity in this game. If you're doing difficult content such as boss rushing or dungeons, there is no quote-unquote, oh, you should be the tank, you should be the DPS, you should be the healer. Everyone can fit into any single role. However, of course, the Hunter is going to be more suited towards tanking simply because you have a lot of defensive capabilities in order to take that damage and soak up all of that damage without instantly dying. Now, something to keep in mind is that every single class can equip multiple weapons. So as you can see over here, the Hunter can use the sword, the wired lances, as well as the partisan. So these are the 3 different weapon choices they can use, and you can see over here all 3 weapons have an orange background. This means that they are all melee weapons. So it's very simple to understand whether a weapon is a melee weapon, a ranged weapon, or a technique weapon by simply looking at the color of the background of said weapon. So if it's a melee weapon, it's going to have an orange background. If it's a ranged weapon, it's going to have a blue background, and if it's a technique weapon, it will have a yellow background. So the Hunter class is a very well-rounded class. It's a very safe class. You can deal a lot of damage, you can take a lot of damage. It's one of the safest melee classes to play because of all your defensive capabilities. And the Hunter is the only melee class which has a cheat death ability, which means if you do take a fatal hit, you will actually survive on 1 HP. Now this ability does have a 3-minute cooldown, but it is very, very powerful, and the Hunter is the only melee class with an ability like this. The next class is the Fighter. The Fighter is basically the Hunter, but you know, screw defense and go all offense, and they can use the twin daggers, the double sabers, as well as knuckles. So the Fighter is very in your face, it's very counter based, so you will need to practice a lot so that you can read all of the enemy's rotations so that you can counter them in order to take advantage to deal additional damage. Basically, the Fighter is the Hunter but without any defensive capabilities and supercharged on the offensive side. So it's really, really fun. However, it's a little bit difficult to play, and it's very punishing if you do get hit, because if you get slapped around once or twice, you are likely dead. Next up is the Ranger. The Ranger can use an assault rifle as well as a rocket launcher, or just also known as a launcher in this game. Now with the Ranger class, you're going to be standing in the backline and you play more of a supportive role, mainly because you have this ability called Blight Round. Blight Round increases the team's damage by 30%, and thus rangers are very welcome in any party simply because it just increases the entire party's DPS by 30% whenever you have the Blight Round. However, this does not mean that the rangers do not deal damage. Rangers deal a crap ton of damage as well, however they sacrifice mobility for it. So just keep in mind that if you are playing a ranger, you're going to be standing near the back lines. You're not going to be able to move as quickly as a hunter or a fighter because your main priority is going to be making sure that you land those Blight Rounds, as well as just being a stationary cannon or a DPS and just blow things away. However, if the enemy manages to get into your face, then you're gonna have a rough time as a ranger, as you do not have a lot of mobility. Next up is the gunner. The gunner has access to the assault rifle as well as the twin machine guns. Think of the gunner as the offensive version of the ranger. It's very similar to how the fighter is to the hunter. Basically, the gunner just throws away all support out of the window. They're like, no, we don't want support. We just want to deal tons and tons of damage. And that is what the gunner does. Now, keep in mind, the gunner does need to stay within mid-range. You can't stand as far back as a ranger, as there is damage drop-off. So you do need to stay in the thick of things, not super close like melee range, but you will be in the middle of things. You will be weaving in and out quite a bit, like get close to the enemy in order to do some big combo, and then you weave out, and you're kind of dancing around the boss with your high mobility and staying out of harm's way while dealing a ton of damage. Because like the ranger, the gunner does not have a lot of defensive capabilities, so if you do get slapped around once or twice, you will explode and die. Next up is the Force. The Force is your very traditional spellcaster. They have access to a rod as well as a talus, so they are slightly more long range oriented. You're going to be standing in the back lines, or you're going to be very high in the air, just zapping using the power of the elements, whether you're using lightning, fire, ice, or even a combination of all these elements to just blast everything away. Now, the downside of the Force is single target damage. Unfortunately, the Force does not do very well against a single target, especially if it's a boss. You do have several skills that deal a lot of damage to a single part. However, the Forces really excel in AoE management. So when you're mobbing a ton of enemies, you will shine. You will kill them all. You will obliterate everything extremely quickly, extremely well. However, if you're fighting a high HP single target boss, for example, that is where the Force struggles a little bit, simply because you are limited to a specific amount of photon arts as well as abilities to deal with said boss. Next up is the Techter. The Techter can also use the talus as well as the wand. The Techter is your traditional paladin support type of class where you can buff up your teammates, you can give everyone more attack, you can give everyone more defense, you can heal your teammates, you can refill your team's photon power, which is basically their mana, and you are very, very supporty. However, the Techter is a very strong class. It's not a very popular class, unfortunately, because it is not super damage oriented. You are going to be leaning towards the more tanky support roles and less about DPS, simply because the damage that the Techter can output is going to be lower than a lot of the other classes, especially more DPS oriented classes. Now we come to my favorite class. I am extremely biased on this, but Braver is my favorite class. Braver can use a katana as well as a bow. This is your traditional weeb class. You're going to deal ridiculous amounts of damage with the katana. The katana Braver is out of this world. It's leagues above all the other classes, but then again, this is just me being extremely biased, but I feel like the Braver is one of the best classes, and I highly recommend people to try the Braver first before trying any of the other classes if the katana or just the idea of wielding a katana interests you at all. I promise you, you won't regret playing the Braver, because the Braver is just, it's buttery smooth. It's so satisfying to play this class, especially when you're using a katana. And on the off chance, if there is an enemy which is flying around, an aerial enemy or something that's really annoying to hit, you can always switch to the bow and you can deal with that target. Now, something to keep in mind about the Braver is you have both the katana and the bow, which are different damage types. As we can see, the katana is in orange, which is a melee weapon, while the bow is in blue, which is a range weapon. So this does mean if you do decide to go a hybrid build where you use both weapons, you will need to adjust the augments on your armors as well as your weapon in order to cater for that specific build. Or you can just be like me, and I am just pure katana only. I don't use the bow and just invest heavily onto melee attack only and just go that path. Or maybe you want to go bow only and you can invest heavily into range potency potency instead of melee potency. Next up is another hybrid class. It is the Bouncer. The Bouncer has access to soaring blades as well as jet boots. Soaring blades are basically dual wielding swords. However, on top of that, you also have floating swords around you. Think of Noctis in Final Fantasy 15 like his royal arms. You basically get the royal arms and you just float around and you use your royal arms or these soaring blades and you just beat the enemies up. It's pretty cool, it's really nice. However, it is considered a melee weapon. But the more popular build with the Bouncer is going to be the jet boots. With jet boots, you're going to be dancing around the enemies while dealing technique damage. You will have access to spells as well, just like the Force, so you can imbue or enhance your jet boots with different elements in order to deal even more devastating damage. Bouncers have extremely high damage, especially when you stun an enemy or against an enemy that is not moving. The Bouncers can deal crazy amounts of damage. And last but not least is the newest kid on the block, and that is of course the Waker. The Waker is the successor to the Summoner, so this is a pet type of class where you do have separate pets. However, it is not the traditional take of a regular Summoner where you have like, you know, different animals that fight for you like Pokemon and stuff. This is more like a JoJo's approach where you have stands. Basically, you're summoning the spirit of dragons as well as monkeys, and you're able to use their abilities to beat up the enemies. So even though you are a quote-unquote summoner, you're still going to be in the thick of things. You're not really going to be just standing 10,000 miles away and just telling your pets to beat up the enemies. You will be weaving in and out, as you do have two separate forms. You do have the dragon form, which is a range attack. You have the monkey form, which is a melee attack. And you also have this gigantic C4 explosive, which you can yeet into the boss and blow them up. So the Waker is a very interesting class, very fun to play, and it's also very easy to learn. Now, something to keep in mind is the Waker uses a harmonizer, which is basically like a short little wand type of weapon. It is a technique class. Even though you're doing melee damage as well as range damage, it all scales off technique. So you only need to focus on one potency, which is technique potency. So very easy to build, very fun class to play. So that covers all the current available classes in New Genesis. If you have any questions about a specific class, leave a comment down below and I'll try my best to answer all of your questions. Special thanks to all the members for supporting the channel. It really means a lot to me. Thank you again. But that's all I wanted to cover in today's video. Hopefully you guys found it helpful. If you did, I would appreciate a like and a subscribe, and I'll see you guys in tomorrow's video. Bye!
What can I say except you're welcome for the heals, the boosts, the res.